The painter laughed while stepping into the shallow water. Many crabs were resting in the shimmering sunlight, and they hurried away or dug into the sand as he joined them. He continued to wade, feeling delighted by the coolness of the rising water. He imagined he was entering a different world through this descent and wondered how the clouds, stars, and passing boats would appear from the ocean's depths. For a brief moment he looked back at the world he had left behind. The Alps made a faint, shadowy line on the faraway edge of the view. Between the big mountains and the long strip of land called the Lido, there was a shiny area of water called a lagoon. The tall buildings in a group looked like they were looking longingly at the wide open sea. He remembered a calm water path that went through fancy buildings with coverings, like big umbrellas. All of a sudden, he strongly disliked his fake life and felt a strong urge to express himself. He envied the fishermen sailing under colourful butterfly-like sails on the vast Adriatic, a space untouched and pure as it extended toward the eastern horizon. Those fishermen were the true artists. They didn't copy colours for a wall. They created them to flutter in the open sea, untouched by the rain. They didn't observe. They truly lived. The painter jumped into the water with a big splash, stretching out his arms and putting his head under water as if showing respect. He laughed when he came back up. He swam slowly and happily, using his arms and legs fully, feeling joyful to be in a new place without clothes on. He felt really good. As he swam above the deep green areas, somehow staying afloat as he wanted, he felt like he was free from the pull of gravity. His whole body, not just his hands and face, felt alive with strong feelings, enjoying the sea's freshness and rhythm. For a while he stayed in the gentle waves, wanting to feel the sea, sun and sky all over his body. While he lazily floated, a sudden shout surprised him from behind, and he got splashed by a lot of water. Then someone started laughing but stopped quickly. When he could finally breathe and see again, he saw a young man with smiling eyes looking at him, trying to appear serious. "Sorry," the new person said, speaking in the slow way they talk around here, not like the fast-talking Venetians. "I thought you were my brother. He works here at RWMIE, and I wanted to surprise him. I wouldn't have bothered you if I knew." "It's okay," the painter replied. "There's enough space in the sea for both of us." The other person laughed and looked at the painter with interest. The painter looked back at him openly. He used his expert eye, like when he paints, and yet it felt like meeting a new kind of person. He saw the clear, sun-kissed skin, the way the neck was held, and the strong arm. He wondered how they would talk to each other, forgetting they had already spoken. "You're not from Chioggia," the stranger said. "I know almost everyone there, and you don't speak their language. I know the Pellestrina dialect, the Venetian and the Buranello, but yours is different. Where are you from?" "I'm from Malamocco." The painter smiled. "Venice is my country now," he replied, "but I speak the Florentine dialect." Even though he had learned the local language, his foreign accent was still noticeable. "Ah, Fiorenza," the stranger exclaimed, using the old name for Florence. "That's on the mainland, right? I've only been to places in the lagoon, like Campalto and La Rana, but I'd like to see Florence too." "You swim differently there, just like you talk differently," he added, observing the painter's strokes. "This is how we swim." He demonstrated a different swimming style, making big splashes as he moved. He was so fast that the painter couldn't keep up. "If you tried swimming like this, you might go faster," he suggested politely. "I don't think so," replied the painter. "I'm not very good at swimming." "Can you dive?" the stranger inquired. "Let's see who can find something underwater first." He performed a somersault and vanished into the green depths, then reappeared holding a piece of seaweed. "Did you find anything?" he asked, noticing the painter's empty hand. "I didn't even attempt," the painter smiled. "You're much better at swimming than I am." "Oh!" said the other, I might have practiced more." He stopped for a moment, feeling a bit shy. "I'm thinking of swimming out a bit. Would you like to join me?" "Thank you, but maybe not," the painter answered. "I've been out here for quite a while. I'm going back now." "Well, have you forgiven me for splashing you?" the stranger laughed. "Goodbye." The painter watched until the dark head became a small moving dot in the water. "That was funny," he thought. "He wouldn't have used you if I had my clothes on. He's a better person than me." Back on the beach, the painter enjoyed the pure sensation once again. He didn't think much, barely remembered anything. He just felt the warmth of the sun, the touch of the breeze, the gentle waves reaching his feet. Lying there, content and lazy in the soft sand, he was disturbed by the sound of splashing nearby. Opening his eyes, he saw the young man from Malamocco emerging from the water, sun-kissed and glistening. It was like a young sea god rising. The painter smiled as he observed the wet figure, a sight that suited his mood. The young man noticed the smile and responded with one of his own. He came over and sat beside the painter on the sand. They exchanged looks, the smile lingering in their eyes. The painter was happy he had hidden his clothes. He realized how silly the differences from his previous world were. Nationality, beliefs, status. These could be set aside like a coat. This was a different world with different rules. He and the young man next to him, they had come here through different paths, but what force in their lives had shaped them similarly, despite being from separate places and races? Here they were, lying side by the sea, both children of the earth, with no distinctions between them, except for the earth's ancient preference for what fits. "You're very pale," said the stranger. "I'm all sunburnt and black." He raised his arm to show how his lower tan was a bit lighter. "When we fish in the lagoon, we often get this way. But even on the sea, the sun burns through our clothes. I've always been dark. I've never seen anyone as pale as you, except maybe women, sick people, and the gentleman at the Lido." Shame filled the painter, shame and intense jealousy. He gazed admirably at the young fisherman lying beside him, tracing the lines of his strong, tanned body, perfectly balanced in its youthful flexibility. Then he looked at his own thin, pale limbs. He sensed the discomfort of being grouped with women, sick individuals and gentlemen. The only shame of being naked was having a body not worth looking at. On impulse, he grabbed handfuls of the soft sand and scattered it over himself. The mockery of the life he had left that morning overwhelmed him again. He despised the confinement of buildings, the pull of ambition, and the thirst for pleasure that had shaped him. How he envied the fisherman's life of sun and sea, his carefree youth, and his untarnished body. "You're not grabbing enough," chuckled the fisherman. He sat up and grabbed large handfuls of sand, tossing them over the painter until he was completely covered. Then he piled sand over himself and glanced at the painter with a questioning look. "Your skin tells me you're not from my line of work. But people in Venice do all sorts of things. What's your profession?" The painter felt more comfortable with the sand on him, and the innocent "you" of the dialect warmed his heart again. "I paint," he said. "I create pictures." "Oh, that's a nice profession. My cousin works on one of the Chioggia boats, and he draws pictures of the Bragozzi when he's collected the tickets. They're really beautiful. Do you draw Bragozzi?" "Yes, and other things too. Houses, gardens, and sometimes people." "That must be quite challenging. Did someone teach you how to do it?" "Yes," replied the painter seriously. He thought of New York, Paris, and the grand art galleries. "Oh, that's different. My cousin says faces are really tricky unless you have a teacher. But he draws Bragozzi well because he knows everything about them. His father constructs them. He once sold one for 10 francs. Do you sell yours?" "Sometimes, but I create many more paintings than I sell. My cousin does the same. He gives them to people to hang in their homes. And in the stores, he gets discounts if he trades a bragozzo. Do you do anything else? It seemed clear that the fisherman's understanding of the art market was influenced by the sales made by his relative, so his assumptions about the painter's earnings were not very impressive. The painter felt relieved. He had worried that a difference might arise between him and his new companion too soon. No, he admitted. I don't know how to do anything else. The fisherman looked at him with surprise. But who knows, he continued supportively. If you only do this, maybe you'll start painting big pictures with gold frames, like the ones under the Procurati in Piazza San Marco. My cousin says the artists who make those are gentlemen. Then it will be a profession. I'll never be a gentleman in my line of work. Do you know how long it takes me to earn 10 francs? The painter remembered how he often saw fishermen in their tall brown socks and wooden shoes near the bright windows of the square. He had never thought of them as anything other than a picturesque contrast to the city's glamour. No, he answered. But your job is better than mine. You get to be outside, and what you do is more important to people than what I do. Well, being out on the sea in good wind is enjoyable. I wouldn't want to be cooped up in a shop or something like that. But we earn so little, and the winter, sometimes we don't even catch enough to eat. You can create a picture whenever you want, but I can't catch a fish whenever I want. Yes, but when you catch a fish, you can eat it, but my picture isn't useful to me unless I sell it. I can't eat it, and not everyone wants to buy it like they want to buy a fish. That's true, but if people don't like your picture, you can ask them what they do like, and then paint it for them. That's it. And in the winter you can sit by the warm fire in the kitchen and paint pictures of boats, flowers, summer, and whatever else I don't know while it's snowing outside. But I have to go into the sea to catch my fish even if there's a shipwreck. The painter smiled while still feeling envious of the strong brown body covered in sand beside him. And then he suddenly asked, Have you ever been in a shipwreck? Only once, the fisherman answered, as if it were a common thing. Tell me about it, the painter eagerly requested, turning on his elbow to look at this person who had experienced shipwrecks without making a big deal of it. Well, I was young then, the fisherman began, as if trying to excuse his youth. It was in my grandfather's boat, one night in March. We were blown onto Punta dei Sabbioni, and the boat broke in two. He stopped as if there was nothing more to tell. Well, what happened? How did you get to the shore? The painter asked eagerly. God knows, replied the fisherman. We fell into the water, and after a while I woke up with people around me. My grandfather was there too. My father and brother drowned. And then? What else could we do? We went back home. The painter's imagination was ignited by this simple seaside story. He was eager to know more details, but he didn't know how to ask for them. What did your mother do? He asked, feeling desperate. She cried. Did they find your father and brother? My father, yes, but not my brother. Being in the water makes one feel sleepy, doesn't it? The fisherman closed his eyes, tilting his head away from the sun. The painter gazed in astonishment. In his life among the grand buildings, these were stories he had heard about, things distant like Olympus and the Crusades, not things he had witnessed. He felt like a child in front of someone who had returned from battles with scars. Sensing someone's gaze on him, the fisherman eventually opened his eyes. How warm it is here, huh? It's better than that time at Sabbioni. Hey, that was cold. He hunched his shoulders as if to shiver, and the sand slid away from him. I love the summer. I wish it would never end. We often come to this same place to pull in our nets, but it's not always as nice as this. The painter was very curious about a life that seemed so exciting to him. Do you come here in a bragozzo? He asked respectfully, careful not to ask too many questions and risk being impolite. "Oh, no," replied the fisherman. "It's too shallow. We come in a Carolina, about 10 of us, and set up the nets, and then pull them up onto the sand." "Oh, yes," exclaimed the painter. "I've seen it at St. Elisabetta, 3 or 4 men pulling on each rope, and then the net wriggling with fish, and afterward they bring the boats ashore, light fires on the sand, and have their breakfast." He had often drawn sketches of the men and boys in their bare legs, pulling the ropes, and had imagined how delicious their fresh fish and polenta must taste in the morning air by the sea. "Yes, we go there often, but the nets don't always have fish squirming in them. Sometimes we catch nothing but crabs, time after time." "Do you do anything else besides going on the Carolina?" asked the painter. "Who?" exclaimed the fisherman with a high, melodious sound and a smiling expression. "I often go in my uncle's bragozzo. We don't have our own because we lost ours when my father drowned, and we haven't been able to get a new one. They're more expensive than the painted ones. We usually leave in the afternoon and stay out all night to bring the fish to the Rialto early in the morning. It's nice to lie on the deck after setting the nets and watch the stars behind the sail, with the lighthouses here and at Cavallino blinking their eyes. And then to head back when the sun rises, wet and cool from the sea, and the wind starts to blow. But in winter, it's different, especially during storms. 2 or 3 boats get lost in every bora." The painter felt even more humble as he thought about the ups and downs of life in a studio compared to the adventures on the sea. "But you mentioned that you prefer living on the water instead of in a shop, right?" "But now, yes, when the nights are delightful and we have enough food. But in winter, that's a different story." He propped himself up on his elbows and started digging a hole that filled with water slowly. "No, I wouldn't want to be in a shop. But I'd like to be a rich person, a signor, with lots of money without having to work, eating meat every day, and always having a fire in the kitchen during winter. I'd also like to go to the inn whenever I want. And most of all, I'd love to travel to other places, see Florence, and all the countries in the world. Sometimes at night, we see steamers passing us in the sea, with lights in all their little windows, and people singing on the deck, way up high over our mast. It makes me feel sad. They pass by so quickly, leaving white water behind them, and their lights get smaller and smaller in the dark until they vanish. Where do those ships go? I want to know and go with them to the countries at the end of the sea." He gazed across at the painter, his eyes fixed on the breakwater where a pilot boat's sails were rising and falling, and where, in the distance, the sea stretched blue up to the sky. "But I won't ever do that. I have to catch fish for my family. They wouldn't have enough if I left. A boy I knew went to America, and now he sends money back to his mother, a lot of money. He won a prize in the lottery, enough to pay for the trip on the steamship and to support him until he found a job. But luck isn't on my side. And even if I could go, I couldn't take my wife, and my mother might go without food long before I could send her money. They speak a different language there, and many things are different. Have you been to America?" He asked this casually, drawing patterns in the wet sand of his hole, much like one might ask, "Have you been to the moon?" "Yes," replied the painter absent-mindedly. "I have been to America." He lay on his back, his hands under his head, gazing out at the sea. Its blue surface was marked by shifting shadows, ranging from purple to the paleness of the sky. He wished that all problems were as predictable as winter, and he was moved by the simplicity of these dreams, by the charm of the illuminated ships. He hadn't considered the possibility of a wife. The fisherman seemed so young. After all, didn't he have everything? The fisherman turned quickly, his sand drawings forgotten. "You've been to America?" He sat up, moving closer to the painter and gazing down with a curious and newfound interest. "You've been to America. Why didn't you mention it earlier? What's it like?" The painter felt regretful, but he looked up at the eager expression focused on him, and he smiled. Oh, it's quite similar to this. There are fields and trees, rivers flowing into the sea, and there's sunshine every day. Sometimes there's a moon at night. Sunshine every day, the fisherman interjected. Sometimes we go a whole month without it here. I'd like that. Is it similar to Venice, with grand buildings, gondolas, and the bell tower? No, replied the painter. It's not like Venice. There are no gondolas or bell tower, and the buildings are all new. They don't have 4, 5, or 6 floors. They have 15, 20, 25 floors. They must be as tall as the bell tower then, and new. In Venice, all the buildings are so old. I like new things, do you? Well, not as much, the painter answered. It's difficult to say which ones will last. Old things are the ones that were good enough to endure. Oh, said the fisherman. What are the people like? The people? They're like you and me. Maybe they don't enjoy lying in the sun all afternoon like we do, he added, stretching his arms out wide in the sand and watching a seagull in the sky. Are they nice? Continued the fisherman. In Italian, the term nice as related to character often conveys compliance rather than the more stern moral qualities expected in the North. Well, perhaps they might seem more not nice if you're from a different country. I think it's because they don't understand. They speak a different language, you know. Usually. Say some, insisted the fisherman, and afterward he wanted the painter to explain the meaning of his words. It's strange, he remarked. When you say those words, I understand nothing. Yet you're saying the same things that we say in Italian. Yes, said the painter, they don't tell you new things in other countries. At first it sounds different, and then you find out that it's really the same. Why, have you been to many of them? I've been to a few others. Tell me about them. Are they similar to America? Yes, mostly. Just some are a bit hotter, some are a bit colder. Then there are countries where people are all black, you know. Really black, like your hair, or yellow, or red. There are places, too, where men dress like women, and others where they go like us, without any clothes at all. And once I went to a place where it was light at night. The fisherman moved a bit closer, his gaze fixed on the painter, as if trying to uncover the mystery of his uniqueness and his luck. If you've travelled so far, you must have been on a big boat, he said slowly. Yes. I'd like to go on a big boat, especially at night. Have you ever stuck your head through one of those small round windows with lights and looked down at the dark sea, trying to spot a bragozzo? Yes, the painter replied, and I've seen the light from those little windows touch the sails and the faces of the men looking up. And then you moved away, leaving them in the night. How I wish I could have experienced that. But I was down in the bragozzo and you were up in the big illuminated ship, sailing to faraway countries at the end of the sea. The longing in his expression pained the painter, who keenly sensed the superiority of the fisherman's robust body and the simplicity of the life that had granted it beauty and strength. The painter had only intended to share a story, not to intensify his companion's yearning. How could he express his true feelings? Yet the fisherman continued, his face almost leaning over the painter's. Have you visited all the countries in the world? He inquired. Oh no, just a few of them, and I don't really want to see the rest. Why not? If I were like you, with no one else to consider and could practice my trade anywhere, I'd want to visit them all. But why? Travelling doesn't show you new things. It's not worth going on long journeys to see people who wear different clothes from us or have different skin. In reality, they're all the same. They're born in the same way, love and hate the same way, work for food and fish, and eventually they all pass away. These are the true universal things, the old things that are hidden beneath their customs and languages. You can observe them here just as well as anywhere else. It will be as you say, the fisherman replied humbly. You know more than I do. But one grows tired of the same thing every day, every week, every month, every year. It's like a week without a Sunday. You've had your holiday, but I never had mine. What you call a holiday was my everyday life, and it didn't bring me happiness. Then I wish I could have had your kind of everyday." He looked out to the sea for a moment, where the fishing boats were manoeuvring as if just to display their colourful sails. "Have you ever been hungry?" he asked, glancing back at the painter. "No," the painter replied, resisting the temptation to play with different meanings and feeling embarrassed to recall the few postponed dinners he could remember. "I have," the fisherman said. "I've returned to Malamocco on a winter morning after a night in the Bragozzo, and I've had to show my empty hands to my wife waiting at the door. I've searched through the fog for the Porto di Lido, tacking up and down outside, scared to enter, until we were so cold and tired that I wished the boat would sink. And I've seen my father's lifeless body washed up by the sea. These are the things I've witnessed, but you—" The painter sat up suddenly. "What are the things I have seen compared to those?" he exclaimed. "What do I understand about the world compared to you? You've experienced more of life here in Malamocco than I ever did in all the unfamiliar cities I've been to. It means nothing to know how people greet each other in different languages or how they dress in foreign clothes, if you know what they say on the decks of sinking ships and how they appear when they're washed up dead by the sea." For a moment the fisherman stayed quiet, taken aback by the other's strong feelings. Then he spoke. "Maybe you're right, but what does it benefit me to know these things? I'd rather have your profession. It's not as repetitive. It's not as difficult. It's not as sorrowful." The painter got up suddenly, his impatience evident. He wanted to show the fisherman the shortcomings of his own way of life in a clear manner so that he couldn't help but be convinced. "Stand up!" he exclaimed. "Let's wrestle." "Why should I wrestle with you?" the fisherman asked, surprised, as he sat back with his hands supporting him in the sand. "I want to discuss these things." "You can talk about those things later," the painter chuckled. "Right now, I want to see how easily I can make you fall. Stand up." The fisherman followed the request, slowly, his body relaxed, ready to see what the other would do. Suddenly, the painter grabbed him, prompting an instinctive response from the fisherman's muscles. There was a brief struggle, and the painter found himself on his back in the sand, breathing heavily, with the fisherman's knee on his chest. "You see?" the painter asked. The fisherman rolled onto the sand next to him. "I'm sorry," he said. "When I felt you catch me, I reacted without thinking and put you down." The painter laughed. "Now you understand how much easier your job is compared to mine." "No, trades don't matter here. It's just a moment. Maybe next time you'd beat me. Let's try again. Come." He began to rise, but the painter held him back. "You know very well that I couldn't win against you even if I tried all day." "Look at this!" He extended his arm this time and made the fisherman do the same. "And look at this!" He stretched out his thin white leg next to the fisherman's muscular brown one. The comparison made him flinch as he realized once again how labor and danger had sculpted the other's body into perfection. He continued, "There's no reason why I shouldn't be as strong and as good-looking as you. I'm probably not much older, I'm not sick, and I've never been injured. So why are we so different? It's exactly this thing, the difference between our jobs. When you were pulling up nets on the sand, I was creating little paper sunsets for people to buy, when they could see new and better ones every day for free, just by looking out the window. And when you were watching the stars playing behind your sail, I was sitting in stuffy rooms. Lamps are not as good as stars for one's well-being, and when you were battling the sea in storms, I was travelling around the world trying to find something new. And that's why you are who you are, and I am like this." He looked down at himself and laughed bitterly. "That might be," said the fisherman, puzzled and a little embarrassed. "But even if I am strong, you are strong enough too. You haven't been kept from enjoying life. Was it really worth it for me to do all those things just to be able to defeat you in a wrestling match? What does it really matter to me? I would rather have been in your position. No, external things cannot bring you happiness unless they connect with something inside you. And the things that bring happiness are so few and simple that anyone can find them. Like love and sunshine. That's all the good my journeys have done for me. To teach me this. I know these things, but you have them. He stopped suddenly. The fisherman looked at him for a while without saying anything. When he finally spoke, it was with humility, as someone lower speaking to someone higher. What you're saying must be true, because you understand and I don't. Still, I wish I could experience being on a lighted ship at night and visit one of those countries at the end of the sea. I've never been there, and you have. At first, the painter didn't respond, his gaze fixed on the tanned figure next to him, but then he smiled curiously. Look, he said, we're both covered in sand from the sea. We should brush it off and return to the world.